Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at democracy in West Africa, two neighboring states, one that's celebrating a concession speech of the outgoing president of Senegal, Abdoulaye Wade, to the president-elect, now you could call him, Macky Sall, even though we won't even have official results till later in the week. And on the other end, a nation that's reeling after a coup that puts an end, at least for now, to 2 decades of democracy. We're talking about Mali. With us to talk about it all, Mamadou Diouf of Columbia University, Christopher Fomunyoy from Dakar of the Washington-based National Democratic Institute, Michael Kirtley, journalist and documentary filmmaker. And from the Malian city of Kai, we can go to France 24 senior correspondent Melissa Bell, who's been on both sides of the border over the past 48 hours. You're now inside of Mali. First of all, tell us, what is the mood where you are?
Well, very subdued for the time being. Most Malians are really waiting to see how this all plays out after these extraordinary days of great uncertainty here. Some of them say to you they're quite pleased to see what the putschists have done. There was this terrible corruption at the heart of the regime that fell. Others say this happened just over a month before elections that were planned, in which the president wasn't even going to stand. You know, they feel that they've had their democratic right confiscated. And of course, it's been a stark contrast coming from across the border in Senegal. Yesterday, I went to where Macky Sall voted. The scenes there were extraordinary. People were so happy and very sort of keen that the due electoral process should go ahead, and that so pleased when they heard about Wade's call to Macky Sall, and realizing that proper democracy had won the day. That was the real victor of the story in Senegal yesterday. And coming from there and getting blocked at the border and finding ourselves in a country leaving one country where it was celebrating its democracy and entering one that is in a sense in mourning of its own, there is a stark contrast there. Having said that, the putschists do say that they are going to hold elections fairly quickly. I think most Malians are waiting to see if they follow through on that promise. The big test will come tomorrow, Francois, when ordinary administrations are set to reopen, as are the borders, and it'll be very interesting to see whether Mali gets back to what it was before this interruption, or whether there will be protests and more trouble in the streets in the coming days.
All right, Melissa Bell, thanks for that update from the western Malian city of Kai. Should mention that, as Melissa was saying, this Monday was a bank holiday in Mali, celebrating the anniversary of the revolution that overthrew Moussa Traoré, a sometimes brutal dictator. Several hundred turned out to protest the suspension of democracy in the streets of Bamako this Monday. But as Melissa Bell was saying, the acid test will come Tuesday when the administration, civil servants are supposed to return to their jobs. Michael Kirtley, we were saying it at the outset. A month ago, Malians' democracy looked safe as houses, and it was in Senegal that we were wondering what was going to happen.
Well, I think that we have to go back to what we were talking about in the first segment. Democracy in Senegal is a culture of a country, for the most part, except for perhaps the south of the country. Democracy in Mali is the culture of a process. There's no specific cultural background in Mali because there are many different ethnic groups, and some of them are heavily divided from the others. And in my opinion, there's no culture that leads to the desire to protect democracy in the same way that it is in Senegal. In Senegal, it's a way of life. The consensual way of thinking, whereas in Mali that's not so true, except perhaps in certain ethnic groups. So today, I think that when we come back on next Tuesday, when Malians come back tomorrow to work, then you're going to see, generally speaking, people are going to be, I think, very disappointed at what's happening. Generally speaking, there's been lots of rioting in some parts of Bamako. But in the countryside, I think people are just going to adopt a wait-and-see attitude, in my opinion. Because I haven't noticed that the idea of democracy was so heavily rooted in the countryside of Mali as I have in Senegal, for example.
And that has been one of the major questions. The opposition slow to organize, as we saw in those images. It finally did. Let's read a tweet from Phil in Bamako. He wonders the following. At 4 different newsstands today, and the most recent paper I could find was from last Thursday, unable or unwilling to go to print. There is the question of why haven't we heard more from Mali's opposition?
I think they're probably frightened right now. But there are some opposition leaders that are coming out against the putsch. There's no doubt about that. But I think right now in my opinion, we're too close to when that happened. Senegal is making declarations that sometimes are contradictory. People have said that he had perhaps died even. He's making declarations about ATT, the overthrown president, and we don't know what's the truth there. So I think this coming week will probably open up a lot of truth as to what actually happened and what's going to happen in the near future. My personal opinion is that this putsch came about because of things that had happened way before, not just the corruption, but also the whole situation with the Tuareg rebellion, because the putschs were mutineers to begin with. Mutineers that were dissatisfied with how the northern situation was being handled. Now they're trying to take over a country, which is a much different thing to govern a country.
We're going to get to the point of the Tuaregs in a moment, but I first want to get back to what you were saying about the culture of democracy. And what is true is we saw how brave people were in Mali 2 decades ago in overthrowing a dictator. But since then, turnout's always been very low at any election. Why is that?
Yeah, because I think it's probably one of the main contrasts between Senegal and Mali. To understand Mali, you have always to compare. And to compare on one hand with Senegal, on the other with Guinea and Ivory Coast. And what you had in Mali from 1960 to the military coup in 68, and from 68 to the end of Moussa Traoré, was a kind of very repressive dictatorship and a very police state, which did not help actually create, if you want, bridges between groups from the north, group the south, within the south and within the north, bridges which could allow people to begin walking in the making of a culture which becomes slowly a national culture, which becomes slowly also a powerful cement between the different groups. And in Senegal, you have really a very, very, very powerful foundation, which was provided by the Wolof on one hand and by Islam on the other. And this foundation carried people. They can use it, even if they are outside of the mix. They speak Wolof, they are part of this. And you can have what I call a Senegalese modernity. You don't have in Mali. And by the way, if you look at what has happened at the end of Moussa Traoré, it's very interesting because he did not actually fall from power from a mobilization of an opposition. Everything began with the, students rioting. And the violent repression actually pushed their mothers out. And they began fighting. And their fight triggered a military coup with ATT. They took over.
This was 1991.
Yeah. And the problem in 1991, which is fascinating, is that the democratic process did not really pay attention to building this political infrastructure. And the Adema, which was the most powerful group which existed, took over. And women in particular were pushed back. And they didn't participate. It's why you have this very, very low, actually, electoral participation. And it was not possible, during the democratic process, to build these powerful parties and open and maintain a dialogue and a discussion. And this is also the different. In Senegal, since 82, we still have the Casamance crisis. Sometimes it's very bloody, sometimes it's very calm. But people kept talking. People kept trying to find solution. But I think the Malian situation, as well as the situation in the southern part of Senegal, are calling for not only, a kind of solution which are, solutions which are not permanent, but is calling for another view of the organization of African state, in particular, the creation of decentralized unit, of local powers, etc., etc. This should be part of the democratic discussion.
The difficulty in creating a nation state. Let me ask you, Christopher Fomunyoy, in the West, were we a little bit blind? We saw that after that coup, the coup leader kept his promise and handed over power. And there was a democratic election. And after 2 terms, that president kept his promise and handed over power. Did we satisfy ourselves with that to think that's a democracy and put our stamp of approval on it?
I would say that with regards to Mali, a lot of the commentaries about the strength of its democracy have really had to do with the promise of democracy and the hopes that the country would eventually establish processes that can strengthen its democratic institutions. Unfortunately, I think in the last 10 years, we saw a weakening of political parties because the Malians came up with some sense of you needed a consensus to govern. And so all of the parties and everybody endorsed the former president. And so political parties became very weak. So when this young group of pushies and non-commissioned officers, for the most part, has expressed their frustrations last week, there was nobody to call them on it, and there was nobody to stop the process. And I think that it is extremely unfortunate that what began as mere grievances, corporate grievances over the rebellion in the north and other issues that the military may have had, has now gotten to a point where the stake of the entire country, which is a very significant country that has many neighboring countries and a lot of other nefarious elements gravitating around it, should now be thrust in the hands of junior officers and non-commissioned officers who have no legitimacy. And this is happening just 6 weeks before an election in which the incumbent wasn't going to be a candidate.
Oh, that's an important point there.
All kinds of questioning about how solid the foundation of Mali's democracy has been and what would need to be done to put the country back on the democratic path.
All right, so a power vacuum, it's a relative power vacuum leading to this. By the way, last Friday, Radio France International, Serge Daniel sat down with Mali's new strongman, a hitherto completely unknown army captain, one who, thanks to various tours of military training in Georgia and Virginia, sometimes serves as an English instructor for his comrades in arms.
I've been in a lot of international summits. I've been in a lot of other places, like the International Counterterrorism Summit in Morocco. I've been there. And a lot of other American, I can say, training in Africa here, like ACOTA, African Contingency for Training and Assistance. I tell you what, I'm half Englishman, I'm half Frenchman.
Half Englishman, half Frenchman, he says. Michael Kirtley, though, the power vacuum has been filled by people who've been looting in the streets.
Well, I think it's a very dangerous situation in Mali right now, not only because of the governmental situation shift from democracy to a dictatorship that we're looking at, but also of everything that's going on throughout the country and how that country is going to respond to the probably future destabilization, further destabilization of the country due to more and more refugees leaving the troubled areas and due to the situation in Bamako that's going to probably get worse before it gets better.
Let's pick up on that point right now. All of this, part of it began because an army that was demoralized after losses against the Tuareg rebellion in the north. We can call up a map of northern Mali. This Monday, aid agencies reporting that citizens are fleeing the Azawad region and the garrison town of Kidal towards the city of Gao on the banks of the Niger River. As for what's happening all the way down, as you can see from that map, all the way down in Bamako, it's a long way away, The rebellion says it's non-committal.
We don't want to create any problems for this new authority, nor for the old regime. You see, we don't want to get involved in the politics in the sub-region. We have our own aim, it's the Azawad, and we won't go further than that.
So it shows again how it's a vast country where people don't have that sense of a nation-state necessarily that Mamadou Diouf was talking about.
Well, if you notice on that map, that red area on top, which is made up of the regions of Gao, of Kidal, and of Timbuktu, is essentially what the Tuareg claim under this new group that was created not too long ago, the National Liberation Front, Movement for the Azawad. They claim that that is traditional Tuareg territory and therefore should be part of a greater Tuareg state, which in their mind probably should include parts of Algeria, parts of Niger, and maybe even parts of Libya. So the problem is that they can easily say that the issue going on in Bamako do not concern them directly. But they do concern them in the sense that as long as there's distraction in Bamako, they can move forward with whatever they're trying to do in terms of liberation. This would all be fine and dandy in terms of understanding the, as Professor Diouf was saying, understanding the overall dynamics of the future of Africa. However, the real question is Mali at the point where there could be a split of Mali, which is what the people of the rebellion want, or is it going to be crushed very violently as it has in the past? The difference this time than before is that the Tuaregs are much better armed than they were before. They're much better informed. They're using social media a lot more than they used to use. The propaganda campaign from both sides is very heavy. Before, it was only coming from the governmental side. Now the Tuaregs have engaged in that. And additionally, we have a very strong militarization of the Tuaregs. Now, that doesn't mean that all the Tuaregs there are for the liberation movement, and certainly one of the things among the Tuaregs is that they oftentimes do not agree among themselves. But I think in terms of your question, that we have a very explosive situation for the sub-region, and honestly, even with the new mutineers that have taken over, I don't see how they can counter the situation in the north so easily, very quickly.
All right, and new mutineers, by the way, having trouble with their legitimacy, with sanctions coming right, left, and center, both within Africa and at the world stage. That's it for this debate. We want to thank you, Michael Kirtley, Mamadou Diouf, for joining us, and from Dakar, Christopher Fomunyoy, for being with us. Stay with us. Coming up next here on France 24, it's business, and that's with Will Evans.